My name is Yvonne, and I'm an alcoholic. I'm assuming that it is proper that we give our sobriety date on account of if we don't have one, they say. Mine is February the 11th of 1969. And for some of you who are new in the program, that seems like a long time. I remember that when I first came, I could not conceive of anybody staying sober over 3 months. But all that means is that all of the speakers that you have heard here, or anybody as a matter of fact, in AA who has some period of time behind them, for me it means that I'm about 17 and a half years away from my last drunk and 24 hours close to my next one. And I have to remember that. I'm unlike this young lady over here on the end. I receive the hell out of coffee. And if she had sent, the gentleman around and knocked on my door, it would have been all right. My husband got up this morning. He's an early riser, and I received coffee twice from him as he came back, I was out last night. I wanted to buy a medallion out in front, and I thought, boy, that would really be neat on account of, because I'm going to have a birthday, if God's willing and the creeks don't rise, pretty soon, and I never have had one like that. And my husband was with me, and he immediately reminded me that I had to wait, that was really, you can't take your cake ahead of time. And so I didn't buy it, but it always tickles me, and I enjoy seeing all those bumper stickers and all of that business and the merchandising on account of, I have thought of a few slogans myself. I am going to get a T-shirt printed, and of course, we could only wear it at AA meetings. It certainly wouldn't be something public that you could put on the bumper of your car, but I want my T-shirt to say, I survived God's will. Sometimes it's tough. I want to deviate for just a minute and tell you about our trip over here. We drove, and which is, that's a little inconsistent and fine. It's pretty inconsistent that you have an attorney as your spiritual speaker on Sunday morning, but nevertheless. We had never really been to the state of Arkansas, and so this last summer we drove through up in northern Arkansas, and it's beautiful. Absolutely beautiful, because we're kind of used to just flat plains out where I live. And we went through the serpentine roads in the mountains, and we looked at the scenery, and I was just really impressed. And so we stopped just every whipstitch along the road, and we'd look at the old antiques that they have. You all are familiar with that. And so someplace between the town of Fort Smith and Fayetteville, we had stopped, and I bought the gross statue of an Indian. And it was about 2.5, 3 feet tall, and so I saw possibilities, and I thought, I'll take that Indian home and rework him and repaint him, and he can be grained like wood, and it will be like a cigar store wooden Indian. So I did that, and we set him outside our door. We live in kind of a western ranch type, setting. And so while we were there, along some highway, this Indian had a twin statue. So I said to my husband, well, we can stop on the way and we can find that twin. Now, it's amazing when you are sober that you can remember where you have stopped. And as we rode, we had an argument as to which highway it was on, and but we found it. And so we had driven quite a distance, and we pulled in a funny little place with a tin barn. And the reason I'm telling you this is on the account of things like this only happen to drunks. Normal people do not get involved in this chain of events. And so we stopped, and we could rouse no one, and there was a big sign, and it said closed. And so I thought, the trip is in vain. Where there's a will, there's a way. Now, we don't know who this man is who owns this place. And so we looked around and nosed around, and there wasn't a soul there. There was a car there, and there was a dog, but nobody even, came to the door, raised the window shade. So we went up the road a piece, and we stopped at another souvenir shop, and so we talked to the lady, and we said, what happened to the man down the road? And she said, well, he's open maybe a week, and then he closes 3 weeks. And the light bulb goes on in the drunk's head. And I said, does he drink? And she said, well, yeah, he's sick a lot. Huh? So he said, well, we'll call him. She said, well, I don't believe you better do that. And I said, no, we'll call him. So I called, used her phone. I called and he answered. So I told him we've driven a long ways and you've got an old twin Indian and we'd like to come down there and buy that. He said, well, I've had the flu. The script is as though I had written it myself or you have participated yourself. So we went down, we had a cup of coffee, and we went back by his place of business, and sure enough, he lived in it was like an old motel or a camping ground. And he came out, it was gross, terrible place. And he came out that door, and he was puffy and swollen and pale, and his eyes were bloodshot. And it was very obvious to us. So we walked down, and we went to his barn, and my husband remembered where the old Indian was, that old statue, and we went back there. So I had said before we went back, I said, I'm going to tell him that I am on I'm going to go to an Alcoholics Anonymous conference over in Jonesboro, and we'll see what unfolds. So we were back in this old, dark, dirty barn, and we were going back to get the old Indian statue, and I said, I'm on my way to AA conference. He said, well, I'm an alcoholic. You know, no surprise. We knew that. And he said, as a matter of fact, he said, I've been drinking today. And he just reeked to high heaven. So he said, come on back up to my room up here, and you can pay me. And we went back up there, and I didn't want to go in. And he invited us in. And I want to tell you something. It's as though it's like the picture that we hang on the clubhouse, you know. We went in there, and he had bottles piled clear up, you know, to the ceiling, empty bottles. And he said that he had hired someone to empty those bottles for him from time to time. He had a case of whiskey that was sitting in the room, and he had an old puke bucket by the side of his bed, drunk. And so we started talking to him, and he said, you know, can I take a little bit of your time? And so we started talking to him about alcoholism, and we did a 12-step right there, and talked. My husband, he wanted to talk to my husband more than he did to me. They're about the same age, and so he said, well, the reason that I'm drunk now is I've been drinking, and he said, this was way into the conversation. Now, mind you, we stayed there a couple of hours. If that's not dedication, I don't know what is, pulling him off bar stools, and he said, the reason I'm drunk now is that he said I had my teeth pulled. And he had, I don't know, 9 teeth pulled. And so my husband has never done this, even, you know, in front of me. And so he said, I've had my teeth pulled. And my husband said, well, you know, since I've been sober, he said, I had my teeth pulled. And he said, I went right back to work that afternoon. And he pulled out his bridge. And the guy says, yeah. And so then, as our conversation progressed, he was drinking all this time. And he says, oh, I can't offer you a drink. But we said, go ahead and have one. Go ahead and have a drink. And he couldn't understand that. And he kept sweetening his drink. And he must have had, I don't know, 3, 4 while we were sitting there. And they were strong. You could tell from the color of the glass. And he said, I just can't believe that you all are sitting here talking to me. How come you've taken the time to talk to me? How come you're here? And I said, well, the Lord sent us. And he said, I believe it. And the drunker he got, the more he wanted to stray from the subject of drinking and alcoholism. And so we said we had to leave. And so I called the central office, and I think it was Van Buren, and they gave me a telephone number for the central office in Fort Smith, and I wrote the number down and laid it on his desk. And when we left, we said, if you want to keep on drinking, it's your business, but if you want to stop, there is a way that you can stop drinking. And we told him about the changes in our lives and how much happier we were since we had stopped drinking. And so we just left the number because we knew that we asked him if he wanted to go to a meeting, and he said, no, not tonight, And there was a meeting in Fort Smith. Any of you who are in that area, who live close to a little town called Mountainburg or in the Fort Smith area, if you get a 12th step call from a guy named Carl, swoop in because he's ready. And we did the preliminaries, on that. That wouldn't happen to anybody else, and it's a little strange that it happened to us, but I think it was good for me on account of it helped me more than it helped that man. And it helped my husband on account of that was the typical scene. And my husband kept saying over and over again, there I was, sitting in that drinking chair. Oh, and the man kept telling us, Carl kept telling us that he had inherited $295,000 just last week, And we kept saying, well, it's not doing you any good. You're just going to sit here and die. And then he asked me, he said, well, what do you think is going to happen? I said, you're going to die. We don't play games about this. That really, I think, reflects my attitude, and my ideas change about this program from day to day, because I don't feel the same way about it now that I did 3 months ago, 5 years ago, or when I first came in. I remember that when I first started coming into AA, first started going to meetings, the first thing that I wanted to do is I had heard there was a rumor going around that they were going to have a committee formed, and that committee was going to rewrite the big book. And so I wanted to volunteer to be on that committee. Now, I'd been sober about 2 months, and because I thought that I had some wonderful ideas. I did not approve of the grammar that was used in the big book. I explained to the old-timers that I had been an English major in college, and their response was, from one of them, I don't care what you were, I was a French general. And I said, the grammar in the big book is not acceptable, because I had always learned that the word got in the English language was, it was incorrect to use it in any kind of a sentence. It was superfluous, and that my teacher had explained to me back in junior high school that got was like a weed in a garden, and that it was unsightly in a sentence, and that you just never used it. And so I explained to the old-timers, I said, look right here, and I opened the big book up, and I said, you can't give away what you haven't got. And I said, now that can be rephrased. And it's like I had always learned that you never end a sentence with a preposition. I started to say proposition. You never end a sentence with a preposition. And it's like the real fancy lady that was driving through the country, and she drove through Arkansas. She stopped at a truck stop, her big old long car, and she was going to get a cup of coffee. So she walked in the truck stop, and the little waitress walked up and said, where are you from? And she said, well, young lady, the region that I am from, in my hometown, there's one thing that we do learn, and that is that it is totally unacceptable to end a sentence with a preposition. And the little waitress looked at her and said, oh, okay, where are you from, bitch? That basically is the response that I received. I started to say that I got. The response that I received from the old-timers. However, let me say this. If I were going to do something today, if the central office would write me a letter and say, Yvonne, at last you have been appointed to make some changes in the big book, I would make 2, and they would fit my story, not anybody else's. But I would say that alcohol is, I would add a word and I would delete a word. I would insert that alcohol is cunning and baffling and powerful and patient for me. That's the reason that I say to you that I am 24 hours close to my next drunk. And the word that I would delete would be from the subject matter that was read to you this morning, and the three pertinent ideas. That A, that we were alcoholic, could not manage our own lives, and I would delete the word "and probably no human power could have relieved our alcoholism," because with me, probably, I tried everything that I knew of in order to get a handle on my life as to what was wrong with me, and I had no idea what was wrong. I tried psychologists and psychiatrists. I went to all kinds of different churches. I tried to find some answer to my living problems, and I couldn't find any. Sometimes I think, when I reflect back, that in a way I wish that I hadn't known anything about AA before I came in, because for some of our members, they are just accidentally, they find out about it, or someone at work will tell them, or like last night, the spouse of the alcoholic will start going to Al-Anon, and when they finally arrive and come into our membership, they're brand new, and they can learn from scratch, and everything is new, and it's a revelation, and it's unfolded to them. In my particular instance, that is not true, because I knew all about AA a long, long time before I ever got here. My mother was a member of Alcoholics Anonymous for 18 years before I ever walked through the doors. I knew about the 12 steps. When she first came into the program, they didn't even have 12 traditions. And I remember that the only requirement for membership back then in the beginning was the honest desire to stop drinking. And they had to change that, because none of us come into this program with an honest desire to stop drinking. You know, it's just plain desire to stop drinking. I went to my first AA meeting in 1959, and I'd like to say to you that I had been sober almost 28 years, but that's not true, because I attended that meeting in Denver, Colorado, and with all of the knowledge that I had about this program, I left the meeting, and I knew that I was not an alcoholic. And then I went out and I had a little slip, and it lasted for 10 years. And all of the things that they said that would happen, happened. I went back to Alcoholics Anonymous in 1966. I went back in 1967. I went back, I think, in 1968, convinced that I was not an alcoholic. I had graduated from law school in 1959, and I guess I got the best job that was available to anyone in our graduating class. I became the law clerk for the Chief Judge of the 10th Circuit Court of Appeals. And while I was in law school, I had become acquainted with and immediately addicted to amphetamine, because we took those pills in order to stay up and study for law finals. The only problem with me was that the law finals were over, and I just kept on taking them, you know. And you get to the point where your tolerance, of course, adjusts, and I ended up, and I just ate those things like popcorn. And you take them in the morning to get up with a cup of black coffee, and you can make it through the day. And then you take them all through the day, and then you get so high and crazy that at night you've got to come down. And so I would have to drink in order to come down. Alcohol was always the drug of my preference, and that worried me a little bit when I first came to this program, on account of they had some kind of a notice that came out of the General Service Office in New York. And I never did understand what the General Service Office even did when I first came in, except I used to get mad at AA a lot, and I wanted to write a letter and resign my membership with them. I was informed they could care less, you know. And it said that in AA that if you got a narcotics problem, you got to go to NA. And so thank God that I had a good sponsor. And the sponsor explained to me, I said, I don't know whether I am addicted to chemicals or whether I'm addicted to alcohol. And she said, well, you have to give yourself a test. And the test is this. If you had a bottle of pills on the table and a bottle of whiskey, and you started to run out of both of them, which one would make you panic the most? I said, the whiskey. She says, you're an alcoholic, and you're in the right place. I had graduated from law school, like I said, in 1959, and I was an alcoholic then. I don't know when I became one. I used to sit around and worry about that. Was it July the 4th at the picnic in 1952, or was it Christmas Eve in 1956? And that plagued me for a long time. And then it suddenly dawned on me one day, it really doesn't make any difference when I became an alcoholic. The point is that I was one and I am one and will always be one. I think really when I first became one, it's kind of like, I've likened it, and I've heard it said before, it's like taking a box of instant mashed potatoes, and you just add the liquid, and you got mashed potatoes. And I had the personality, and I got the booze, and I was off and running. My first drink was when I was 16 years old at a slumber party, and I drank then as a result of experimentation and peer pressure. The same thing happened to me when I was 16 that happened to me on February the 11th of 1969. I got drunk, and I threw up, and I got sick, and I got crazy. And during that entire period of time, it was just a story of my alcoholism progressing to the point that there was just no way that I could handle it, and no human power could have released my alcoholism. By 1964, I had 3 children, and did a geographic and moved to California. My mother had become the president of Alcoholics Anonymous. In Oklahoma City, and she was sponsoring a lot of people, and I'd been raised in AA, and I remember how hard it was for her to get sober way back then. Took about a year in and out of the program, and it seems like I kept seeing the same people hanging around the house, and they would call and they would come out, and she kept going to the meetings, and we didn't even know what AA was. You have to understand, 36 years ago, they didn't have any blooming Al-Anon program, much less Alateen. And my daddy wasn't about to join Al-Anon. And to this day, we'll sit around and we will talk about things that happened when we were drinking. And his attitude is, and we got a lot of members of AA in our immediate family now. And my husband is one, and his daughter is one, and my daughter is one, and my mother is one. And sometimes, you know, you can sit around and have an AA meeting, and my daddy's attitude still today is, I don't know why you all want to talk about those things that happened when you were drinking. He said, I just want to forget what your mother did. And he's a civilian. You can't make him understand that it's essential that we have to remember our last drunk, and he just closes the door in his own mind. That's a thing of the past. But those people kept hanging around our house, and they kept 12-stepping her, and then when she finally got sober, she started bringing them in. Back in the olden days, I'm convinced it was a program of promotion, not attraction, because she would bring the most god-awful people home that I mean, really stinking drunks. Sick, no teeth, right off of Skid Row, and they would all cluster in our house, and those AA members would come in. And the most unique scene that I recall is when they used to walk the floor, and they would say to these old sick, puking, shaking drunks, they'd say, can you go 5 minutes more? Can you go 5 minutes more? And the drunk would say, I'll try. And they'd get up and they'd walk back and forth, and they'd walk and they'd walk. They'd look at their watches. And they used to make them drink a lot of orange juice and honey. And then they would serve them a lot of black coffee, trying to sober them up. Can you go 5 minutes more? Now, this procedure would go on around the clock. And then some of them would leave, and then some more AA members would show up. And they'd stay with them 2 and 3 days at a time. And they'd haul them to meetings. And somehow or another, they'd make it. I have known of some who didn't, but there are still people now that are sober in Oklahoma City that sat in our living room years and years and years ago. And I can remember them walking and looking at the wristwatch. I learned during that the environment that I was growing up with at that time in AA, I learned about the 12 steps. I heard him talk about the allergy of the body coupled with a mental compulsion to drink, and I didn't believe that. I thought all of this was a bunch of hogwash. Now, as far as convenience was concerned, it was fine with me that she went to AA meetings on account of my mother and daddy didn't fight anymore when she started going to AA like they used to. They still have their spats, and they still fight now. They're 77 years old, and they still fight, But nevertheless, I just marked that up to you live together too long or something. I don't know. But no threats of divorce. And I had a younger brother, 13 years younger than I, and the two of us would go around the house, and we used to find whiskey, and he'd be 4 years old. He was 4 years old, and he'd find it in the clothes hamper or wherever in the toilet tank, and he'd run down the creek and pour it out, and she'd get mad at him. Then I'd go find whiskey, and we went through all of that, my younger brother and I did. So we were really grateful when she found AA. Not that it was saving her life, because we had no idea what you were talking about. But the point is that we started the restoration of a family, and they weren't fighting over drinking, and we weren't having to hunt bottles anymore. But we were invaded by new acquaintances, people in Alcoholics Anonymous, who came into our home, and they did it seemed like to me ours was the center of 12-step work. I'm sure that's not true. But they were just hustling everybody in town, trying to get them to join, and I was convinced of that because they gave me that test, 20 questions. And at that time, when I was 20 years old, I failed the test because I answered 5 of those things, yes. And I think if you answer 2, you've got a drinking problem. And I answered, and my attitude was, well, they're just looking for members. And they're trick questions. Like, have you stopped beating your wife? And they'll do anything just to suck you in that program. But the knowledge that I had was simply that I knew what happened to alcoholics because I'd heard them talk. I knew that alcoholics had to go to jail. I knew that they were arrested on what we call DUIs, DWIs. I knew that spouses left them. I knew that they ended up in drying out hospitals. I knew that they went to the nut house. I knew the course of events. I knew everything that was coupled with alcoholism, what alcoholics had to go through. And when those things happened to them, then perhaps they could admit that they were alcoholics. So in my way of thinking, if none of those things ever happened to me, then I could never be an alcoholic. Because you see, I had insurance, and my insurance was knowledge. And my knowledge was that I wouldn't drink in the morning, and I wouldn't go to jail, and I wouldn't do any of the things that everyone else in AA did. And consequently, I'd never have to grow up and be like my mother and put my family through what we had to go through. But in 1959, when I went to that meeting, I didn't listen to what those people were saying. The reason that I went to the meeting was because I had gotten drunk in the bar of the Brown Palace. And I had said some things that were offensive because the federal judges had gathered there after work to have a drink, and I made a fool out of myself, and I thought I better try to hang on to my job. And so I'm going to tell my boss that I went to an AA meeting, and I did. And the things that I listened for were things like going to jail, losing families, going to mental institutions, all of the things that in my mind were stereotyped alcoholics. And they hadn't happened to me. And I hadn't lost my job. And I went out. And I never did emotionally identify with the things that those people were talking about at that meeting. And they were talking about fear and insecurity and guilt, but I didn't hear that. 1967, married, living in California. I did a geographic on account of I just wanted to get out of Oklahoma City. I wanted my mother to leave me alone. I didn't want any more preaching about drinking. And we hauled my little old kids out there. And in 1967, I went to a meeting We were living in Malibu. We had moved to Van Nuys, and I had said, my drinking, of course, then had reached the point in its progression that I had figured it out that if you drink after 5 o'clock, you're okay, because that's not alcoholic drinking. And then as we get crazier and crazier, I figured, well, a drink at noon is okay, because people do drink at noon. In California, they drink, a lot. And so I could justify that. And then pretty soon it got to the point that if you had a little early morning drink at 8 o'clock, like a Bloody Mary, that it was really 5 o'clock in London. And that was okay. For a long time I worried about why I was an alcoholic. And there are 2 sentences, and I think that you find them in the big book in Dr. Silkworth's opinion, and it's the only thing that has ever answered my question. And it says, and I believe it's on page XXVI, if you like to read Roman numerals, if you speak Latin. And it says at the very bottom of the page in the last paragraph that men and women who are alcoholics drink primarily for the effect. I never understood that, but that's exactly why it ran. And then it goes on to say that as our disease progresses, that we reach the point that we cannot differentiate the true from the false. That's the bottom line, folks. That's the story of what alcoholism is all about. We can't tell the true from the false as our disease progresses. We justify and we rationalize and we compensate every reason that we ever had a drink. I drank because we had money in the bank. I drank because we were overdrawn. I drank because the sun was shining. I drank because it was foggy. I drank because I was happy to celebrate. I drank because I was sad. And I just drank for any reason. And I had reached the point I couldn't differentiate the true from the false in my life. I was totally out of touch with reality. 1968, I went to another meeting. Same thing. I said, get me out of Van Nuys earlier. Move me down to Malibu and let me live on a beach. And I can become a beachcomber, and I will not have the pressure of the smog and the freeways and just Los Angeles living. And so we moved down to the beach, and it was a beautiful, beautiful place to live. But the only problem was that Yvonne took Yvonne with her, and I continued to drink. My habits didn't change. I did all of the things. I got to the point that if you put vodka in Bloody Marys, and so I would buy a bottle of vodka, and I'd mark it myself mentally, and as the bottle would go down, I would fill it with water. It means you got to pour a lot more in your Bloody Mary, but I didn't want anyone to know how much I was drinking. And I used to go crazy, and they'd haul me up to the Malibu emergency clinic. And the doctor said, your problem is you're getting ready to have a nervous breakdown, and he would prescribe medication for me. Whatever it was that he gave me, and I still do not know to this day, but I call it an instant lobotomy. Because I'd take that medicine, and 5 minutes later I couldn't remember anything. And I'd take it during the daytime, and I'd send those little kids out on the beach to play, and 5 minutes later I couldn't remember where they were. I really didn't know where they were. And I would run out and I'd look for them, and I would holler. And I would holler for the kids, and they would answer, and they'd say, Mama, we're right here. My oldest son would say, you were just out here, Mom, we're okay. Now, probably it was not medically prescribed that I was supposed to take that stuff and drink at the same time, but I did. I went to the meeting in '69, and there was no answer. I could not emotionally identify. We had been evicted from our home in Malibu, and we had moved into a transient apartment house. The gentleman, the man that was my husband, was unable to work from time to time. Because I was unable to take care of those children. And I wasn't drunk all of the time, every day, fall down, pass out drunk, which we sometimes tend to forget when we come to AA. the most important thing for me was just to get enough in me that I could still function. And I would function through the day as a functional drunk, and then at night, when the kids went to bed, I would really get it on. And I'd drink wine in the daytime, whatever, beer, anything I could find. And then at night, I would settle down, and I would try to drink, and did, every night, until I absolutely passed out. Now, I justified in my own mind that I wanted to stay up, and of course in Los Angeles, TV goes all night long, that there would be some show that I wanted to see. It started at 1 o'clock in the morning, and that I'd want to stay up and see that television show. And then I would have to grab the TV guide the next morning in order to read what the show was about, because I was in a blackout, and I couldn't even remember it. There was a show that it seemed to me that they kept rerunning, and they kept replaying it over and over. To me, it was daily, and I would never watch it, and I would hide the TV guide. It was called Wine and Roses. And I would never, ever allow myself to watch that television show because I knew that that would tell my story. And I knew basically something was wrong with me. I knew I drank too much, but I could not relate my drinking to my insanity. Now, and I'm talking about, you do crazy things when you drink, no question. But my insanity seemed to absolutely mushroom when I wasn't drinking. Just the act of just living was so painful that I couldn't stand it. I could not stand to get up in the morning and face the day. I was afraid to go to sleep at night because I was afraid I'd die in my sleep. And so I would just drink myself to sleep every night. And it's funny how you get bruises on you when you can't remember how they... I had bruises all over me, and it's got to be from hitting things, you know, as you bump against stuff just trying to get around in the house. I weighed 170 pounds. I laugh now. I say if I'd rolled over, I'd been in Cleveland, you know. All of the psychotic behavior that went with the disease. Afraid to go to the door. Afraid to answer the telephone. Couldn't go to the grocery store. Could not drive a car. And when I went to the grocery store, now this was the max of my activities. Going to the grocery store was a big thing. Couldn't work. And I'd have to drink before I went to the grocery store. Because when I got there, I was terrified of people. And I could hardly stand waiting in line to get checked out. Couldn't make decisions about what to buy when I was there. And in a sense, I was functioning, but by the same token, I was not a good mother or a good wife or a good human being or a good citizen. I was just zilch, just zero. And I wanted to die, and I was afraid to. And I wanted to quit drinking, but I knew I couldn't stop. And I knew that if I drank that I would die, but you see, I felt that if I didn't drink, I was going to die. Now, you don't have a lot of choices in that kind of a situation. In November of 1968, when we had moved into this transient apartment house, I was sitting out on the front steps, iron steps, drunk. And I got up and I walked in. It was a little two-bedroom thing, and we had all of the kids sleeping in one room on what you call day beds, I guess. And I remember uttering the universal alcoholic prayer. I said, God, if you're there, because you have to qualify it. And I said, God, if you're there, help me. Just help me. And that's all I could say. And my higher power, now, as I understand him, knew that I wasn't ready. And so I had to wait until the following February. And we moved into a nice little house. Business changed a little. And we moved in a little house in Van Nuys right across the street from the school. And the kids were back in school. And I got the flu in January. Back then it was called the Hong Kong flu. And I sat on that couch and I was sick, and I used to drink hot buttered rum. And I drank and I drank and I drank. For weeks, I guess. I don't know. I cannot remember. But it was just a daily thing then. I think when my progression really got accelerated, it was just a roller coaster immediately downhill. That night, on February the 11th, my husband had gone to do the laundry because I was not capable of doing it. And I got up and I don't know what happened. To this day, I do not know what happened. I know psychologically, I believe, what happened to me. I had always considered alcohol as my friend. It had gotten me into a lot of places where I was comfortable. I never liked to go to cocktail parties up at that point in time, and I had to drink before I got there in order to feel comfortable. And when I drank at the cocktail parties, it got to the point that I had to try to watch how much I drank or I'd get drunk. Most of the time I did. Sometimes I could handle it, but when I got home, I would get drunk. I had always felt as though I had been deprived. Now, if there's anything that's going to make an alcoholic angry, a practicing alcoholic, it's when you take the whiskey away from them and you pour it out. Now, Al-Anon friends, let me tell you something. If you have ever done that and survived, you're lucky. It's a wonder you're not dead. You don't pour a drunk's whiskey out. The feeling of deprivation and panic sets in. I could not feel deprived of anything, and that was my state of mind, constant deprivation. So, considering alcohol as my friend, I believe what happened to me that night, psychologically, and I think it was a twofold thing, and spiritually. I think that my prayer had been answered that night on February the 11th, but psychologically, having considered alcohol to be my friend all of my life, I reached the point where I was not, and I speak of deprivation, of giving something up. An alcoholic will not give anything up, particularly alcohol. But what happened to me was psychologically, I reached the point where I was not giving up, a friend in alcohol, but I was getting rid of an enemy. And there's a big difference. I walked to the phone. On the way, I poured my drink down the sink. I'd never done that in my whole life. And I went to the phone and I called the operator because I could not dial the phone. I was too drunk. I said, "Get me Alcoholics Anonymous." She said, "Where do you live?" I think operators in Los Angeles, this is a big business with them. And I told her, and she called the North Hollywood Clubhouse. And she rang it for me, and they answered. And so I started to try to talk to him. That I wanted to talk to someone that I might have an alcohol problem, and And they asked me my address, and they said, "We'll be there." And to me, it took forever for them to come. But I had just enough time to go back and try to wash my face, and I put on some mascara. And of course, by the time they got there, it was just black streaks, because you cry a lot when you're a female drunk. Tried to put some clothes on. I drank, and it was my drinking dress. It was the muumuu, and I slept in it, and I drank in it. If I ever took that dress off, it'd break. I know. And but I put on some other clothes, and they came, because I was trying to fix up for them a little bit. And my husband came home, and I told him that I had called Alcoholics Anonymous, and he said it's about time. And I don't even know what happened to him. I don't know if he left or went to the bedroom. I have no idea. But the AA members came, and they came in, and they sat down, and they started talking to me. 3 of them. One sober 3 months, one 5 years, and one 9 years. And I didn't want to talk to the 5 and 9 year people. I wanted to talk to the girl that had been sober 3 months. Inconceivable to me Now, I've heard old-timers say from time to time, you don't take anybody that's in the program that's brand new on a 12-step call. I disagree. I could not relate to anybody sober 5 years or 9 years. I could talk to that girl, and the court had taken her children away from her because she was an unfit mother. I knew that was going to happen to me with my little kids. And so I said to her, how do you stay sober when you don't have your children? And she said, I do it a day at a time. Now, I had heard that all of my life. It never registered. It never registered. And I tried to tell them how I felt. But I didn't have any labels for emotions. I didn't know about what fear was. I didn't know about resentment. I didn't know how to identify or put a handle on the feeling of guilt. But the more that I talked, they said, we understand. We understand. So they suggested to me kindly that I get the alcohol out of the house. They said, you don't bring a rattlesnake in your house. So as they left, I remember thinking, if that girl can stay sober 3 months, so can I. Hostile. Just hostile. Very competitive. And so they left, and they said, when do you start drinking? I said, in the morning. And they said, will you be all right tonight? You go to bed? They said, we'll call. And the next morning, they started calling me. And they called me every 15 minutes, every 30 minutes, through the entire day. And then they gave me telephone numbers to call. And I called people that I had never heard of. And I want to tell you something. I am so grateful today that I have been privileged. And all of my life, I was privileged to witness 12-step calls in purity. From the time that my mother got sober till the time that the people came to see me. I am so grateful that the question that they asked me was, if you want to quit drinking, Yvonne, we can show you the way. Do you want to quit? That was their question. Not, do you have hospitalization insurance? Because I witnessed real 12-step work. I went to my meeting that night. They came by and picked me up. And from that night until now, my life has done a complete turnabout. I was never a party to really all of this wonderful love that they talk about. You know, when I went to meetings, I guess the old-timers met secretly and sized me up and said, this is how we got to treat this one. And they said things to me like, sit down and shut up and listen. No, you can't talk because you don't have anything to say. They did not allow me to speak from the podium until I had been sober over 1 year. They said, you leave your head outside, that's what got you here. And I immediately, of course, other than rewriting the big book, you see, I tried to explain to them that I was an educated woman, a professional woman, and that I had a doctorate of jurisprudence degree. And they said, we don't care if you're from Yale or jail. You sit down and you listen. And they said, there are a lot of people that are too smart to make this program, but we haven't found anybody that's too dumb to make it. And so with that attitude, that loving display, you know, I did exactly what they told me. I didn't like them. I didn't respect them. They couldn't pronounce the word anonymity. They asked me to carry ashtrays and coffee cups back, and they didn't seem to understand who they were talking to. Huh? I just was cut from a different cloth, these people, and I didn't fit in. and I became belligerent and hostile, and I'd call up my sponsor, and I would scream, and I would yell, and I went to meetings, and I beat on my high chair, and I sucked my thumb. And I soon learned that alcohol was not my problem. Now, I could relate to that because it was when I was sober that I was crazy. Of course, I did crazy things drinking, but when I was sober, I couldn't stand it. I had come into the program of Alcoholics Anonymous with the body of a 38-year-old woman and the emotions of a child. I had never grown up. Never. I didn't know that. I've likened it often to an automobile accident where it's not the fuel that's at fault, but it's the driver. And that's exactly, it came to rest with me. 3 things I learned. I learned that 1, alcohol was not my problem, but that it was my solution. Number 2, that I was responsible for everything that I had ever done. I drank to and because of, and I drank at people, and I always had a reason for everything that I had ever done. And they taught me you've got to be responsible for your own acts. Number 3, I soon came to believe, and it was very difficult, that God loved me, because I had always believed that I was a stepchild. My concept of God was childish, that when you were small, that if you are good, you are rewarded. Your parents come in, you've behaved, they buy you ice cream or take you to the dime store. But you have to be good in order to be rewarded and be loved. So I thought that's the way it was with God, that if you were a good person, He'd love you. And if you were a bad person, He just sat up there and made black marks by your name. And I could not conceive that there could be a higher power that could love me through all of the times that I had been through. It was just impossible for me to understand that. And when I finally began to believe that, I started making some progress in this program. Until then, I was staying sober. The thing about Alcoholics Anonymous is that it's the plurality, it's the strength, the steps on our walls. We admitted, we came to believe, and we made a decision. It's the strength of the group. We used our mouths to get sick, and we come to meetings, and we used them to get well. Today, when I go to AA meetings, and I'm crazy, you know, it kind of, and I will try to surrender something if I've got a problem. You know, and I don't hear any loud voices, and like Jerry said last night, any burning bushes. I don't hear any of that. I have not spiritually progressed to the point that I can communicate and ask questions and receive answers with voices. And sometimes when we're like that, we go to meetings, and it's like it tells us in the big book that our spiritual consciousness is our group, and sometimes we hear answers through our group, and the answers may come from someone that's been sober 3 months, God forbid, you know, or someone that's been sober 5 years. But try it sometime. I've gone, and I'll still reject the answers, but you think about it, you know, and the answers come in our group consciousness, which is God. Well, I went to those meetings and went to a minimum of 5 a week, and that doesn't necessarily mean that I was a good member of AA. I don't believe that just going to meetings makes you a good member of AA any more than sleeping in a garage will turn you into a car. No. I think you got to get out and you got to try to work the program, and I did not understand the Serenity Prayer. And at my level of understanding, I just simply prayed, God, grant me the serenity to accept the things that I could not change. And I only knew one thing, and that was that I was an alcoholic. And I just wanted God to help me accept that. Number 2, to change the things I can, and those were my drinking habits. And I didn't even worry about the wisdom to know the difference. That was too complicated. But I prayed that serenity prayer with that understanding for many, many months, because that's all I could believe in. I went to a meeting one time. I was concerned about taking the third step, and I said, how do you do it? And some smart aleck lady said, well, if you're going to take the third step, and you really do, you have to pack your bag because you're going to travel fast. And they came to me. I said, lady, just one word, how? How do you take it? I went home, and my sponsor said to me, she was from Alabama, and she said, you've got to be willing. And I talked to her, why do you have to be willing? She says, well, you just get willing to be willing. And she says, that's the toe in the dough. And so one night I thought, well, I'll try this. And so I prayed in my simple little way. I said, God, I know that if you really want to, that I can die in my sleep, if that's your decision. And I said, so I've got to be willing to die in my sleep. This was how I reasoned. And if I become willing to die in my sleep, then that's a complete and total surrender. Now, you see, in the back of my mind, I knew that if God wanted me to die in my sleep, I was going to die in my sleep, and it didn't make a damn what I thought about it, you know. So I thought, well, this is kind of a con job. I said, God, I'll be willing. And I got to the point that it was okay. I had these kids to raise. I had things to do. But I reached the point of surrender that it was okay. And then once I could surrender living and dying, then it was a lot easier for me. The next morning when I woke up, I pinched myself. I said, I'm alive. And it was a real neat trick then to simply say, okay, God, I'll surrender my life every day as I'm alive. Because that's a lot easier to give up than your breath and your heartbeat, And that's the way that I had to handle it. I consider the third step the second surrender. And it's become necessary for me to take that third step sometimes 5 minutes apart every day, because it's against my nature. Jerry talked about it last night. He talked about our ego, our self-centeredness. And I'd sit down. I didn't understand any of this, and I had to take an inventory. And I took it on a match folder. And then I graduated to a 3x5 card. And then finally to a legal pad. And filled up that legal pad. And it wasn't until I took my inventory that I figured out who I really was. All I was doing was going to meetings and taking the first 3 steps and, mouthing off. And I had absolutely no personal identity. And when I took the inventory, I learned that my character defect, basically, was the feeling of the lack of self-worth. And from that stemmed everything else. From that stemmed everything else. There's a story of Alice in Wonderland, and Alice comes up to the crossroads, and she is talking to the Cheshire Cat. And she says, well, which road should we take? And the Cheshire Cat says, well, where are you going? And she said, well, I don't know. And the Cheshire Cat said, well, then it doesn't really make any difference. That's the way I was until I came to AA. Because I just never had any goals or objectives. I thought I did. But one day I wanted to be a vocalist with Tommy Dorsey's band. The next day I wanted to be a doctor. The next day I wanted to be a lawyer. The next day, I wanted to be a professional ballerina. I just never had any purpose. Just whatever. Just never really grew up. So the inventory made me understand a little bit more about who I was. And I learned that I was not a bad person, but that I was a sick person. I learned about my self-centeredness and my ego, which is a defensive mechanism, because basically my feeling was one of the lack of self-worth, and that I just couldn't allow anybody to ever get close enough to me to know what I was really like inside, because I felt so inferior. I learned that the only thing that is ever hurt or gets hurt in human relationships is ego. True today. When I become angry or I have problems in my family, it's my ego that is involved. Of course, I take my husband's inventory all the time, and it's very easy for us when we do that. The hardest place to practice this program is at home, because they know you. And at work, you can always practice the program, or get back with it. But it's with your family, where you have the intimate kind of conflicts that arise just out of intimacy, just out of living at home. I learned about reality, that my reality didn't exist when I was drinking, that it was always edited and abridged. It was that part, we reached the point where we cannot differentiate the true from the false. And I learned that reality itself is not painful. It's not painful. It's my resistance towards reality that is painful. The more I resist, the more painful it is. I had a hell of a time when accepting the fact that my youngest daughter was a drug addict. Hell of a time accepting that fact. True, she was. But it was painful for me to admit that and to accept it. And there was so much resistance. You see, the resistance that you exert towards the reality is directly correlated with the amount of pain that you feel. Now, when you quit resisting a situation, the pain will suddenly diminish, and that's called acceptance. So your acceptance then will move in to the reality, and the pain is gone. I returned to the state of Oklahoma and became Assistant Attorney General in the Criminal Division. At that point in time, it became necessary that the man that I had been married to and I get a divorce, they had said when they made their 12-step call on me that you'll either live together, or rather grow together, or grow apart. That's exactly what happened. I began growing in this program, and my values changed, and my priorities changed, and we ended up just parenting 3 children, and we were roommates. And I was divorced in 1972, and I want to tell you something, I had absolutely no ambition to remarry. On the count of all I wanted to do was raise those kids and do the best I could, and in 1973, I was appointed to the state bench, and financially I was able to support them, and I had no desire to remarry. Now, an amazing thing is, when you start going to AA meetings and you are single, Al-Anon women look at you funny. Your relationship with them changes. And I never did particularly cotton to them in the first place, on the account of you can't ever tell when an Al-Anon slips, So I never did like them too much, and I just stayed away from them as much as I possibly could. But when I would go to AA conferences, I would listen to what those women had to say, and I used to think, my God, they are really sick. If they would live with a drunk, it's true they're sicker, how they have put up with all this. If there's anything I would never do, it was that. I ain't that crazy. Well, in 1975, during the 2-year period, I had become acquainted with an attorney who practiced law in my court. And he was a heck of a nice guy outside the courtroom, and we'd visit from time to time, just about things in general, and he's a gentleman. Someone said he's really a southern gentleman. He's from New Jersey, but he was, no. But when he came into my courtroom, the sparks would fly, and I didn't like him, and he didn't like me, and he was the first attorney to take a case up on appeal to the Oklahoma State Supreme Court and get me reversed. And I became very paranoid. I never trusted him. Anytime he came into the courtroom, I knew that he was trying to trick me. And, we just didn't get along in that courtroom. And I had thought seriously about holding him in contempt in one particular case and putting him in jail. And Madeline Crumby versus J.C. Penney is the name of the case. He did take it to the Supreme Court, and he beat me again on it. Got me reversed again on it. And anyway, in our conversations, I had heard that he drank a lot, but his wife had been terminally ill, had been for a long, long time. And so I had assumed the position of president of AA in Oklahoma City, took my mom's job, and had become the expert in alcoholism. And so I thought, well, the reason he drank is because his wife had been sick for so long. And I had even heard that when he had come to court, sometimes that you could smell alcohol on his breath. And there were times when he would introduce exhibits and hand them to me, and his hand would just be shaking. And I thought, that poor thing is scared to death of me. That's what we call hangovers, when your hands shake. But I didn't know that. So anyway, I have to tell this story on account it's just crazy. How we get into things, I don't know. And I had a Great Dane dog. I lived in the country, and he had a Great Dane dog. Didn't live far from me. I didn't know that. And so the time came for my dog to get married, and I picked up the phone, and I called him. And we were going to meet at the kennels, or he was going to come by or something, and we were going to go take those dogs to get them married. And he came by the house, and we were trying to get my dog in the back seat, and the German Shepherd jumped in the back seat with her. And I was yelling to get the dog out. Now, you don't hardly separate a German Shepherd and a Great Dane in the back seat of a car. That's a little difficult. And so we got, we got the male dog out, and we went on to the kennels, and the dogs got married, and then 3 months later we did. And I think the puppies were German Shepherd. But he had 4 children and I had 3, and we tried to put those families together, and it was something else. Tomcats and a tow sack. And I'd go to meetings, and I had said to him, it's absolutely necessary that you go to Al-Anon, because I wasn't going to have that mistake occur again. So he'd go to the Al-Anon meetings and come home and complain that he really wasn't getting a lot out of them, that they were nice ladies, but that he really, I think Al-Anon is an orientation program for AA sometimes. I heard last week, that they audit AA in Al-Anon. And I used to go to meetings and talk to some of the guys, and I'd say, my husband's crazy. He has a perfect personality of an alcoholic. Perfect. He acts just like I used to act. Has the same character defects, take his inventory daily. And what's more, he's mean. And but I said, he doesn't drink. The guy didn't drink whiskey. That's what I thought. What was really happening was that I would come to these AA conferences, and I would leave on Friday, and while I was gone, he would get drunk. He's what you call a periodic. And I never understood periodics any more than I do social drinkers, because if you got a problem, you drink daily. And you get it on. But he drank periodically, and he would try to figure out ways to get me invited to come to these conferences, like secretly paying my way, just so I'd get the invitation to come and speak, so that he in turn could drink while I was gone. One morning we had to take, one weekend my oldest son was going to give a talk in Arkansas. I think it was Arcadia at an Al-Anon conference, and we were going to get up and drive the kids over. And he got up and he started a fight with me. Now, what he would always do before I would come to an AA conference is start a fight. My interpretation of our conversation was that he did not want me to come to the AA conference. And he didn't want me to have anything to do with AA, because he always fought, just as I was leaving. Now, what was really happening was that he would start a fight. I didn't know this, because periodics are really crazy. And he would start a fight right before I left in order that he would have a reason to drink, because they pigeonhole resentments and they'll keep them for months, and that will justify a big drunk. I never did do that as a daily drinker. You get it on the day that you hate them, you know. So he'd store those things up, and then he'd get me out of town, then he'd get drunk at me, and then he'd sober up by the time I got back on Sunday night. So I just gathered up the kids, and we took off, and we went to the convention, and on the way I didn't know what to do. The Al-Anon ladies had talked to me about release. I didn't know what that was. All I know is that I just prayed. And I said, God, I don't know why it is that I cannot seem to ever develop nor nourish a lasting relationship with anybody. It seems to me that I'm going to have to make a choice between Alcoholics Anonymous and living with him, because he doesn't want me to have anything to do with AA. So I just want you to take him and just do whatever's got to be done, but I can't handle this anymore. Now, I didn't know that was release. All I know was that a burden was just immediately and instantaneously lifted from my shoulders, and I just felt hollow, just hollow inside. Went on to the conference, came back, we walked in. I'd accepted whatever it was in that prayer. Walked in, his clothes were all moved out of the closet. He had left me a note on the bed, and it was kind of drunkenly scrawled and said he was at the farm and for me to call him, and so I called him, and he told me he had been in a car accident while he was moving his clothes, and he was driving a little MGB with a cloth top, and that car had rolled and had skidded on its top, I don't know, 30, 40 feet. He was not strapped in, or he'd have been killed, but it threw him in a ditch, and he came to in the ditch, and I don't know what happened. He just came back to the house, and the cops started looking for him, and because they found the car and they couldn't find the body. And so he called his daughter, and she came, and he knew that he was in trouble if they found him drunk, and he hid in the woods, and the daughter picked him up, and she took him to the farm, and she hid him out from the cops. And this really is good when you're on the bench and you're a judge. And he took the truck keys away from him so he wouldn't drive into town to get more whiskey. And it was so bad that he told me that he had gotten drunk on Dr. Pepper and scotch. Now that's sick. But that's all that he had to drink around there, and so he said, I haven't eaten in 3 days. So I didn't know what to do, so I called Al-Anon and talked to an Al-Anon lady, and she said, you don't do anything. I said, but you don't understand. I've got to go over there and be the producer and the director and the da-da-da-da-da. She said, you don't do anything. Is he going to convulse? I said, I don't know. I said, but you don't understand he hadn't eaten 3 days. She says, tell him to go beg some food. So he said he didn't have any coffee. And she said, well, tell him to go beg some coffee. Well, that's farm area, so you have to walk a bit to another farmhouse to beg, I guess. I don't. So anyway, I called him back, and I told him to go beg some food. And I didn't ask him to come home. I just asked him if he had been hurt in that car wreck, and he told me that he hadn't. My middle son said, you know, if Henry's going to drink and drive, he needs to put wheels on the top of his car. And he called me the next morning. He kept calling me up, just driving me crazy, and I was trying to release him, and he called me the next morning and said, I'm sick, I can't go to work. So I immediately saw that opportunity, and I said, would you like for me to call? And he said yes, so I called and talked with one of the lawyers, and I said, Henry is at the farm, and he has wrecked his car, and he's drunk. Click. Because I learned from Al-Anon you don't lie. And I let him come by that evening to eat some soup as long as he bathed first. And he came in, he had scabs all over him, and he had told me he needed to call someone in AA. And for me to call him, I said, you call him. I knew that he had to make the call. He says, a can of broken glass is in the wreck. I said, tell me who, and I'll look up their phone number, and I'll give it to you. And he didn't call, but he came on by the house, and he said, well, I think I'll go to an Alcoholics Anonymous meeting. Which one shall I go to? And again, I knew. I said, you pick. So he had to go back to the little AA clubhouse where he had, for a long period of time, gone into the Al-Anon room. And this one night he had to go back, and he went into the AA meeting room. And he's been sober now 8 years. Maybe it's 9. My years are running together. His daughter then came into the program a year after that. She is still sober. My daughter went through the use of drugs and chemicals. She drove us crazy. I bet you we've spent $5,000 driving up and down the streets of Edmond, Oklahoma, looking for her at night, doing everything that we should not do. We enabled her to the point that it almost killed her. I did everything that I should not do, trying. I could not understand why she couldn't see it. She'd been to Alateen and rented her an apartment, paid the rent, got her furniture, making payments on her car. I got her a job. I did everything in the world. And within 3 months' time, needless to say, that she lost the apartment, and furniture was gone, and the car was torn up. And I had gotten her the job at the agency where I worked. I had become the general counsel of a large state agency, and she never did go to work. They called me up and they said, Robin hasn't been to work in a week. I said, fire her. Director called me down. He says, is there any reason that we should not fire Robin? I said, no, you fire her. She's drinking and doping. You fire her. And so they fired her. And Robin had been sober in six months in AA. And she left. And she went back out for about another year. And in that period of time, the progression with her as it had with me had set in. And she ended up living out of her car. We heard that she was hitchhiking around. And I was crazy. I was absolutely crazy, and I didn't know how to surrender. And so finally at night, what I had to do when I went to bed was I just said, God, you take her. Do with her what has got to be done. But I qualified it. And I said, God, by the way. Because I had visualized her ending up in a ditch dead, how it goes. And so I qualified it, and I said, God, I said, just keep her breathing. That's all. Just keep her breathing. Because I knew that if she was breathing, she was salvageable. Birthday, August the 13th, didn't give her a present, didn't call her, didn't do anything. About a week after that, we got a call in the middle of the night. She was hysterical. And she said, Mother, I am willing to go to any length. And she had learned that in her 6 months in AA, and she's now been sober 2 years. We have a lot to be grateful for. A lot to be grateful for. I'll never forget my Thanksgiving when I was drinking right before I came into the program in that November of 1968. Didn't have enough money to buy a turkey, living in that transient apartment house, and there isn't a Thanksgiving that goes by that I don't think about this privately to myself. Had those 3 little kids, didn't even have any silverware, had to go next door, borrow the silverware from a burglar who had stolen it, and he kept it in a black bag in his closet. We borrowed his silverware and we ate on paper plates. And that was our Thanksgiving. And I was dying. And I look at it now. We're going to have a sit-down dinner of about 17 people. It's a lot of work to do, but when you stop and think about it, my heavens, the gratitude. On account of their coming to our house. All of our kids are, doing great. They say the odds are if you don't have one in jail out of 7, you've done a good job. Everything is really pretty copacetic. My oldest son didn't drink, didn't smoke, perfect kid, became a narcotics agent. And is really gung-ho. Law enforcement, catches people, goes undercover. And then my second son has a personality that fits well into this program. And I think that he is blossoming at this point in time. Smokes dope. So my oldest son goes out and they have a project called eradication. And they chop marijuana down every weekend. You've seen it on TV. So I say I got one kid chopping it, one smoking it, and one going to meetings. We have a lot to be grateful for. They want to come to our house. My husband's kids want to come to our house. And if either one of us have been drinking, you know that wouldn't be true. My mom, Christmas Eve, will have 36 years sobriety. A couple of months ago, my husband and I went, and she was inducted into the Oklahoma State Women's Hall of Fame. And she couldn't have been doing that. She'd have been famous for drinking, but that was the result of this program. I want to close with one story that I think typifies how I feel today. You've heard people from the podium say that you have a choice as to whether you're going to drink or not drink. I don't believe that. I think you have a choice as to whether you're going to live or to die. It's that simple. People say I have a lot of slips left in me. Some people say, no, I don't have a lot of slips left in me. If I drink one more time, that's the end. I'm a healthy person. I think I could go out and I could drink for quite a while yet. But the problem that I have is I don't know whether or not I have another recovery, because it was so difficult for me to get here in the first place. I don't believe I have choices anymore. I don't believe I have choices in following the steps of this program and not following them. I have to give up. I can do things that I should not do. I don't believe that people get drunk from doing bad things. I think people get drunk because they fail to do the right things. I do not believe that people have a lot of freedom when they come to AA to do anything that they want to do. I think the freedom that we enjoy in Alcoholics Anonymous is the freedom that we don't have to do the things that we used to have to do. And there's a difference. I don't have any choices. I can be miserable for as long as I want to be miserable. But eventually, if I don't do something about it, I will drink. I have learned that I've got to surrender, and sometimes it takes me a long time. I want to write the script, be the producer, run the show. But the pain just increases and increases. And now you're in a little while and you develop a little technique. And it doesn't take you very long to surrender. I have to surrender for 3 days before. And now I've learned surrender in 10 seconds. Just take it. Take it. I can't handle it anymore. But I'll hang on to it sometimes as long as I can. And I will suffer. But I don't have any choices. I've got to give up eventually. My pain depends upon how long I want to hang in. Sometimes they say you got to be strong in hanging on. And I've come to believe that the real strength is in letting go. No choices. To me, to drink today would mean death. The story of the young people in the tribe is true in every tribe. And there was one wise man. And so they wanted to humiliate sagacious, wise man in front of the rest of the tribe. And they were going to embarrass him, and they were going to trick him. So at the tribal meeting, they had a plan, and that was that they were going to take a bird, and they were going to hold it in their hands. And they would go to the wise man, and they would say, "Is this bird, what is this?" And he'd say, "It's a bird." And they'd say, "Is it alive or is it dead?" And if he said it's alive, they planned to kill it and squeeze it and break its neck. And if he said, "No, it's dead," they would open up their hands and the bird would fly away. So they went to the tribal council meeting and they had the bird, and they said to the old man, "What is this?" And he said, "It's a bird." And they said, is it alive or is it dead? And he paused, and he said, the choice is yours. And so, my friends in AA, I say it's living or dying. The choice is yours. Thank you.